This is Wilmington Weekly with Matt Perkey. Welcome back. This is the Sunday wrap-up episode for this week's Wilmington City Council meeting from February 19th, 2026. If you watched live, attended in person, or caught pieces of it afterward, this episode is meant to slow everything down, put it back in order. What was discussed, what passed, what required clarification, and what comes next. This was not a routine meeting. It was consequential. And when meetings are consequential, clarity matters more than volume. Today, we'll walk through the workshop, the downtown parking sign discussion, the scale of the public comment, the annexation and rezoning of the 545-acre parcels, the conditional use discussion, referendum process, East End Elementary purchase, and what's coming up next. Then we'll take a step back. Council began with a public workshop. Workshops do not include formal votes, but they often preview where policy conversations are heading and give space for explanation before any action is taken later. One of the primary discussions involved downtown parking signage. Trevor Shoemaker, director of Main Street Wilmington, presented a similar proposal that he brought forward last year. His recommendation is to remove the 2-hour and 4-hour parking limit signs throughout the downtown corridor. His view is that the current signage creates visual clutter and detracts from the historic character of downtown. Under his proposal, the time limit signs would be removed, the traffic control map amended so those designations no longer exist. Other signage, including handicap parking and no parking zones, would remain. The key part of this discussion is enforcement. Wilmington has not had a dedicated parking enforcement officer in over a decade. Parking is controlled on a complaint-driven basis. If someone calls, police may respond. Otherwise, enforcement is limited. Councilmember Schleybaugh asked whether removing the time limits entirely would eliminate the ability of business owners to request enforcement if a vehicle remains parked for extended periods in front of their storefront. Service Director Crow offered a hybrid solution. Instead of eliminating time limits altogether, he suggested replacing the numerous individual signs with consolidated signage covering an entire block. That would significantly reduce visual clutter while preserving the legal structure necessary for complaint-based enforcement. Crow's approach attempts to balance aesthetics with enforceability. At the conclusion of the discussion, President Osborne asked that the 2 draft ordinances be prepared for the next meeting, one reflecting Shoemaker's proposal, one reflecting Crow's hybrid approach. Council will deliberate between them publicly. Also in the workshop, Auditor Vance walked through supplemental appropriations and explained then and now resolutions. These occur when an obligation is incurred in one fiscal year, but paid in the next. Under Ohio law, Council must authorize those payments. She also clarified that much of the supplemental activity involved required true-ups for workers' compensation and an updated employment funding procedure. No votes were taken during the workshop. Ordinarily in these wrap-up episodes, I move straight through the meeting in chronological order. But this meeting was different. Some items were routine, some were procedural, and some carried weight. For that reason, I'm going to begin with the annexation and rezoning votes, and then circle back to the remaining items afterward. 37 residents signed up to speak during public comment. The majority of comments focused on the annexation and rezoning of the 545 acres. Several speakers urged council to table the ordinances. Others addressed broader concerns about data centers, infrastructure, environmental impact, leverage, timing. And regardless of position, the scale of participation is worth noting. 37 speakers in a single meeting signals that this issue carries weight within the community. Council considered 4 ordinances annexing and rezoning approximately 545 acres to light industrial. The annexation ordinances and the rezoning ordinances apply to the same 545 acres. Annexation brings the property into the city. Rezoning determines how it may be used once inside city limits. Each ordinance requires a third and final reading before a vote on passage can occur. Before those votes, Councilmember Schleybaugh moved to table the ordinances. He stated multiple times that he supports development and growth. His concern was not opposition to development, but pace and sequencing. He expressed that given the scale of 545 acres, additional time and structural clarity were warranted before final passage. Councilmember Snar also spoke at length, outlining concerns about leverage and whether certain structural considerations should be resolved before rezoning became final. Other members spoke at length about the desire to move forward now so the city would be ready for whatever project came next. The motion to table failed 4-3. After the motion failed, each ordinance proceeded to third reading and final passage. Each passed 5-2. With those votes, Council completed legislative action on the annexation and rezoning of the 545 acres. During discussion, Council members Snar and Schleybaugh raised the idea of amending the zoning code so that large-scale data centers will be treated as a conditional use under light industrial zoning rather than a permitted use. That distinction matters. A permitted use means that if a proposal meets the objective standards of the zoning code, approval is administrative. Discretion is limited. A conditional use allows additional review and the ability to attach project-specific conditions based on circumstances of a particular application. The suggestion was framed as preserving leverage and flexibility for projects of this scale. Amending the zoning code to change how data centers are categorized would require separate legislative action. The majority chose to proceed with the rezoning without first addressing that structural question. That reflects a policy judgment about readiness and sequence. During discussion, one council member noted that moving forward with rezoning would place increased responsibility on Planning Commission during site plan review to ensure that protective measures are addressed if a data center project proceeds. It's worth remembering that Planning Commission operates within the framework that Council establishes through zoning. Site plan review evaluates compliance with existing standards, but it does not rewrite the underlying zoning code. That distinction helps clarify where authority sits at each stage of the process. The motion to table represented the final opportunity for Council to pause before final action. Had that motion passed, Council would have retained control over the timing and sequencing. By proceeding to final passage, control shifts to the referendum process. If a referendum qualifies for the November ballot, the rezoning will be paused for approximately 8 months. Acceleration does not always shorten timelines. Sometimes it transfers them. In this case, control shifts from Council to the referendum process and potentially to the voters in November. Under Ohio law, residents may file a referendum petition within 30 days of the ordinance becoming final. The signature threshold is 35% of the votes cast in the last gubernatorial election within the city limits. In Wilmington, that equates to roughly 1,200 valid signatures. If that threshold is met and certified, the ordinance is suspended and placed on the ballot. Organizers indicated in public comment that they are targeting the November election. If signatures are not gathered, the ordinance stands. If they are gathered and voters reject the rezoning, the ordinance does not take effect. It's important to understand a structural detail. Wilmington is a statutory city operating under the Ohio Revised Code. Even when voters decide in an ordinance through referendum, future councils retain the legal authority to amend or repeal ordinances through the legislative process. That does not make it politically simple to revisit an issue the public has voted on, but legally, legislative authority remains with council. The referendum process determines the immediate outcome. It does not permanently remove legislative authority from future councils. If 1,200 valid signatures are gathered, that represents more than a third of voters who participated in the last major statewide election in the city. That scale would be measurable. Council advanced a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a purchase agreement for the former East End Elementary property at a price of $285,000. That agreement includes a 45-day inspection period, During that time, the city may conduct building inspections, environmental review, title review. The city retains the right to terminate the agreement during that period if findings are unsatisfactory. The agreement references intended youth or recreation use, but programming and renovation costs have not yet been defined. Acquisition is the first step. Due diligence is where the real evaluation begins. Council also passed Ordinance 26-01, which addresses staffing structure within city operations, including adjustments related to code enforcement. Supplemental appropriations were approved, as discussed during workshop, along with the then and now resolution. Council also approved a solid waste grant agreement supporting local recycling and waste management efforts. And while these items did not generate extended debate, they reflect the ongoing administrative and financial responsibilities that continue alongside higher profile issues. Let's talk about some upcoming public meetings. Board of Control meets February 27th, 1 p.m. On March 2nd at 5:30, both the Park Board and the Board of Zoning Appeals meet. I believe Park Board is downstairs in the community room, and Board of Zoning Appeals will be upstairs in council chambers. As alluded to earlier in the meeting, Planning Commission meets March 3rd at 4:30 in council chambers. Following these rezoning votes tonight, that meeting will carry added relevance. According to the schedule, the site plan for the AWS project will be revisited. Council holds its workshop and regular scheduled meeting on March 5th. Also on March 9th at 2 p.m., the Revitalization Grant Committee meets. And later that evening at 5:30 on March 9th, there will be a special committee meeting for Public Works and Enterprise Committee to review recycling survey results and discuss fluoridation. Agendas will be available on the city website, and all meetings will be streamed through the city's Boxcast service. Looking back on the meeting tonight, the final rezoning vote was 5-2. That division reflects different views about pacing and leverage. Some members expressed that development should move forward under the existing zoning framework. Others argued that before rezoning such a large parcel, the city should consider whether large-scale data centers ought to be treated as a conditional use rather than permitted use within light industrial zoning. That distinction is not rhetorical. It's structural. Permitted use limits discretion once objective standards are met. Conditional use preserves the ability to apply project-specific review and conditions. Legislative bodies make two types of decisions. Substantive decisions determine what happens. Structural decisions determine how future decisions are made. The vote to proceed transferred the next phase of control to the referendum mechanism. Sometimes decisions intending to move something forward place it into a different process entirely. Clarity during determinative votes matters. Sequence matters. Structure matters. The rezoning is passed. The referendum clock is beginning. What happens next will be determined by process. As always, my role here is to explain process and context. I've done my job if you're able to draw your own conclusions. Thanks for listening. I'll be back a week from Wednesday with the preview for the next meeting.